Hi, I'm Cash Mendenhall from SLC West, and this is my original oratory. Movements, James Baldwin, author and activist, said, are deeply cyclical. Actions to change society for the better are followed by reactions to preserve an unjust status quo and ad infinitum. America has, so far, fallen victim to those reactions. It is now our task in this nation not only to own up to those past grievances, but to break that cycle, to improve in permanence, to begin again. Baldwin wrote largely of race in America, late of which we've experienced a revelation in American public life. But his words feel pressing and immediate in nearly all topics, in a year that was beset by challenges and upheavals of an unprecedented scale, long before an incumbent president was unseated. Foreign policy is no different. Trumpism, on an international scale, led to a dramatic and destructive reduction of American presence on the global stage. And with social opinion shifted rapidly towards change, this time is opportune for rethinking of America's place abroad. So I humbly bring forth this offering to the discourse surrounding the crossroads of our diplomatic role. Not a radical rethinking of our methods, nor a restructuring of our aims, but a utilitarian and down-to-earth guide for restoring the international modicum of a nation too long hampered by its own isolationism. I'll talk about the three key points of our reconstruction. First, our relationship with our allies. Second, the vitality of developing new fronts for political and cultural engagement. And finally, a readjustment of course in the inevitable conflicts with our global rivals. Foreign policy in Washington has long been seen as a dirty business, a refuge of war criminals and politicians without ethics, and for far too long it has been that. But we've been granted a chance for change unprecedented since the beginning of this century. A chance to begin again. We waste it at our peril. The process begins where it always has, with revitalizing our relationship with our allies abroad. There are several multi-layered steps to this process, which deserve alone a speech far better than the one I can give, but it's instructive to look back at the functional beginnings of modern American involvement in the broader world. 1916. With America's entry into the Great War, a previously isolationist nation, disinterested with what they saw as old world affairs, oscillated violently to a burgeoning industrial behemoth thirsting for revenge. It sparked a relationship that Secretary of State Dean Acheson would go on to call, quote, perhaps the greatest alliance since Athens and Sparta, end quote. Our allies in that traditional basin of global power, now the European Union, are ever yet vital to America's fortunes abroad. Donald Trump in large part attempted to abandon them. Playing into global populist fears about the power of extranational entities, the Trump White House marked a strong, if hopefully temporary, pivot. The US abruptly abandoned vital global instruments, ones we helped build. But this is reversible. Zishan Aleem, writing for Vox at the close of last year, remarked that thanks to a strength of institutions and dynamic leadership in Brussels, particularly from Germany, the EU has managed to hold down a destructive wave of populism that threatened to end the great European experiment. It's time for North America to once again re-engage and lend legitimacy to the Union, in doing so, protecting the world order. Rebuilding ties with our European partners is of the utmost importance to protecting American interests abroad. But political ties are only a piece of the puzzle. It's also necessary that we re-establish our close economic interweavings with our allies to both the West and the East. Trump's economic doctrine of America First left a weaker capitalist society, both domestically and abroad, and an incoming Biden administration should notice and course correct on the disastrous route this isolationism leads us down. A rally line is not a stand-in for sound fiscal policy, and it never will be. This rolls neatly into another segment of re-establishing a notable American presence with our allies. The current administration was unique in seeing treaties not as tools of adjustment, but as vague forms of un-American authority to attack wherever possible. With volatile pullouts in everything from a missile deal with our close allies in South Korea to the now infamous Paris Climate Accord incidents, America recoiled from an instrument of diplomacy it had wielded to great effect for nearly 70 years. That must change. The narrative here is global, and more than the State Department alone can handle. But in concert with our close allies, we can begin to roll back this nativist wave of electoral upsets and return the vision of America as an endlessly dynamic and entrepreneurial nation. The final step of re-engaging with our allies is perhaps more cynical, but no less necessary. The force of the American military must again be deployed respectfully and strategically, restoring the image of a powerful but delicate national force, not a cannibalized counterterrorism unit with a space force that can be deployed by Twitter. A key part of this is making cross-operation with friendly international forces and coalitions the norm. In a 21st century world, it is a rare conflict indeed in which the United States can stand alone. It's vital that we present American forces acontextually as international guardians, spearheads of democratic reform, not just our imperialist playthings. All these steps and more must be the norm for restoring America's trust and friendship with long-standing allies. But it isn't just our old allies that deserve this level of attention. We must also foster an entirely new relationship, and look for the edges necessary to retain global influence. Foreign Affairs ran an article in February of this year with the headline, "How China is Winning Africa." And it's true. As the article elaborates, quote, "In Angola, Mozambique, and Ghana, the Chinese government is heavily subsidizing the building of infrastructure developments owned by Chinese industry giants, and many in Washington and London fear that bases will be soon to follow." That worry isn't unsubstantiated, and though it may seem atypical, we need to look far into these new horizons and pinpoint nations stagnating, but ones that can be revitalized by American aid, socially, politically, and culturally. The role of benevolent superpower. We must first open cultural offices, embassies, and other apparatuses of American authority within these countries, and deploy knowledgeable and well-equipped diplomats to the capitals and seats of power in places many Americans would have trouble locating on a map. Yes, we must increase spending on foreign aid too. Foreign aid is one of the most reliable forms of international development and a historical triumph. The Marshall Plan, after all, rebuilt a continent. With that said, it's also necessary to recognize the role of capital in these exchanges. Building inroads for trusted, well-regulated American corporations and modernizing markets is an exchange that grants both influence and overall wealth to both nations while providing an economic opportunity subsidized by the state. In the best form, these partnerships can build infrastructure from the ground up and provide a vivid and immediate vision of the national future. There's a military component, too. Rather than just shipping in massive amounts of largely unregulated weaponry, as the Department of Defense has been prone to do in the past, we should provide training and logistic support. It's more reliable, it fosters better long-term relationships, and according to a DoD internal memo from 2017, it's, quote, considerably cheaper. It provides an opportunity for real governmental legitimacy in previously lawless regions, a potential safety for hundreds of thousands of unprotected people, and it allows America to compete in previously chaotic regions with little diplomatic attention. This, in turn, aids the third crucial point, competing with our global rivals in the 21st century. In 2012, on the campaign trail, Mitt Romney was asked by a reporter at a stop in Florida what he thought the biggest threat to American hegemony worldwide was. He could have said almost anything with very little splash. Instead, he looked gravely at the camera and said, Russia. The media lambasted him for a week, and it was one of many comically bad answers to very simple questions that may have cost Mitt the presidency. But on that particular note, he feels intuitively right, even if he wasn't then. America's competitions globally with increasingly powerful governments in Beijing and Moscow does feel reminiscent of the Cold War, and it's a grinding and complex set of issues that won't be resolved anytime soon. But there are a couple of steps that a new administration can take to combat totalitarian forces. First, we must stand up unequivocally to all forms of authoritarianism wherever we find them, no matter how temporarily palatable to our personal politics. Dictators cannot be tolerated, much less coddled, by an American government or an American president. In conjunction with the previous point, America must challenge the growing spheres of influence of these powers by competing for potential satellite states. We need to be firm in preventing election meddling from the Kremlin in both Eastern Europe and the West, and forceful coercion of our allies in East Asia from Beijing, particularly in the South China Sea. This is the moment for tempered aggression in those regards. As Foreign Affairs reports in April of 2019, quote, China is edging into dangerously familiar territory, attacking American allies overtly in East Asia, end quote. All this tied together forms a component for this vision, a blueprint for a brighter future of American diplomacy and the world. Since the close of the Second World War, America has internationally propped up vicious dictators, criminals, warlords, and bureaucrats. It has systemically robbed states of their potential and victimized countless numbers of people. Dictators like Saddam Hussein, Augusto Pinochet, and Nicolae Ceausescu have all been at the direct hand of CIA influence in democratic elections abroad. But we've also pushed the world towards greater levels of global equity and prosperity than ever seen before. Rebuilt Europe after it was ravaged by the most destructive war in human history, pioneered peaceful international alliances like NATO and the United Nations, and indirectly and directly bettered the lives of millions. We won the Cold War. And beyond the debate about that these questions raise about who we are reaching a point of pressure in which a readjustment into the light is necessary. Through these 3 points, rebuilding relationships with our allies, creating new relationships in the developing world, and reconsidering how we confront our enemies abroad, we can complete this second genesis of American diplomacy. It is not impossible, it is not out of the question, but it is necessary to break that cycle, to improve in permanence, to begin again. Thank you.